The town threw Mary Beth Holloway out. Just like that. On a morning so cold the air felt like it could crack your bones, they pushed her and her two little girls outside the city gates and bolted them shut. Behind her, the whispers of the righteous folk followed her like a pack of stray dogs. Vicious, hungry. Sheriff Amos Cutter's words still echoed in her ears, flat and heavy as a coffin lid. City won't carry your burden. Her burden. He meant the twins, Annie and Rose. Two little girls with eyes the color of a deep creek, shivering in their patched-up dresses. They didn't understand what was happening. They just knew the whole world had suddenly turned against them. Mary Beth stared down the frozen road that disappeared into the dark timberline. She had nothing. No food to speak of, no shelter, and a heart so heavy with shame it felt like a stone in her chest. Her husband Jacob was gone. A fever took him in the fall, and with him went their small scrap of standing in this town. He'd promised he'd never let her fall. But the ground had swallowed that promise whole. Now, a new promise took its place, the one she made to the two trembling bodies pressed against her legs. She bent down, her voice a low whisper against the wind. "We'll keep walking, my darlings. Every step takes us somewhere new." She had to believe it. She had to. The great iron gate screeched shut behind them. The sound was final. A full stop at the end of a life. The world ahead was a blank page of snow and ice, and she had no idea what story would be written on it. All she knew was that she couldn't stop walking, because if she stopped, the cold would take them. And the cold wasn't just in the air, it was in the memory of every face that had turned away. The silence on the road was a heavy blanket. The only sound was the crunch of their worn-out boots on the snow. The twins were trying to be brave, but their little hands were turning blue. Rose whimpered that her fingers hurt, and Annie stumbled, her face pale with exhaustion. Mary Beth knelt, rubbing their hands between her own chapped ones, singing a soft song Jacob used to hum, a song about summer fields and wide rivers. It felt like a lie in this frozen wasteland. By midday, the forest loomed ahead, a dark, jagged line of teeth against the pale sky. The townsfolk used to tell stories about these woods. Wolves, they said. Outlaws. Madmen. But the town had been full of its own kind of monster. At least the trees wouldn't judge her. As they stepped under the first great pines, the wind died down. The world went quiet, muffled by the snow. It was almost peaceful. Almost. Her stomach ached with a hunger so sharp it felt like a knife's edge. And that's when she saw him. He moved between the trees like a ghost. A giant of a man, with shoulders as broad as an ox, and long white hair that caught the light. An axe was slung across his back, and he walked as if the mountain itself belonged to him. Her breath caught in her throat. She'd heard the whispers. Jedediah Boone, the mountain man. A wild relic who answered to no law but his own. They said he was dangerous. They said he was crazy. He was walking right toward them. The girls hid behind her skirt. Mary Beth stood her ground, her body rigid with fear. He came closer, his eyes the color of river stones, unreadable and cold. "We mean no trouble," she managed to say, her voice shaking. "We're only passing through." The giant man stopped. He looked at her worn clothes, at the two terrified faces peeking out from behind her. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence was deafening. Then he spoke. His voice was deep, rough like stone on stone. "You'll not pass through," he said, his gaze unwavering. He nodded toward the dark woods behind him. "You're coming with me." Mary Beth's heart hammered against her ribs. The words weren't a request. They were a command. She looked from his massive frame to the shivering bodies of her daughters. The town had cast them out to die. This man, this myth from the mountains, was offering... what? Salvation? Or just a different kind of end? She had no choice. She had no other road to take. With a deep, shuddering breath, she nodded. She didn't know if she was walking toward a rescue or a trap. All she knew was that standing still meant freezing to death. Following him was a gamble, but it was the only one she had left to play. Jedediah Boone turned and walked into the forest without a backward glance. He didn't check to see if she was following. He just knew she would. Mary Beth gathered her daughters close and stepped into his deep tracks in the snow, leaving the frozen road, and what was left of her old life, behind for good. The path to his cabin wasn't a path at all. It was a route known only to him, winding through thickets of pine and over frozen creeks. The twins were exhausted, and Mary Beth had to carry them one by one, her own strength failing. But every time she thought she couldn't take another step, she'd look up and see Boone's broad back, a steady landmark in the swirling snow. The cabin was tucked away in a hollow, so perfectly a part of the landscape you could walk right by it and never know it was there. It was built of massive, rough-hewn logs, with a stone chimney puffing out a thin ribbon of gray smoke. It looked less like a house and more like something that had grown out of the earth. When Boone pushed open the heavy plank door, a wave of warmth and the smell of wood smoke washed over them. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth. The single room was stark and simple, but it was warm. It was safe. The twins stared, their eyes wide with a wonder that had long since been replaced by fear. Boone set his axe by the door. He didn't say a word, just ladled thick stew from a pot over the fire into 3 wooden bowls. He set them on a crude table. The girls ate like famished wolves, their faces buried in the steam. Mary Beth ate too, the warmth spreading through her, chasing away some of the deep, biting cold. But a new kind of chill settled in, the chill of uncertainty. Who was this man? Why had he helped them? He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask where she came from or why she was out on that road with 2 children in the dead of winter. He just moved around the cabin with a quiet purpose, his silence as vast and intimidating as the mountains outside. He was a puzzle she couldn't begin to solve. Days bled into one another. A strange, silent routine took hold. Boone would leave before dawn and return at dusk with game slung over his shoulder. Mary Beth would cook and clean, mend their clothes, and tend to the girls. The cabin was a refuge, but it felt temporary, like a breath held too long. She owed this man everything, their survival, their warmth, and the debt was a heavy weight. She tried to keep her distance, to maintain a wall of pride, but it was hard to do when he was the only thing standing between her family and a frozen grave. One afternoon, Rose's only shoe split open. Mary Beth's heart sank. She had no way to fix it. But Boone saw. He took the shoe without a word, pulled out a thick needle and some sinew, and knelt by the fire. His huge, calloused hands, hands that could split a log with a single blow, worked with surprising gentleness, stitching the worn leather back together. Rose watched him, unafraid. And Mary Beth watched them both, a confusing mix of gratitude and suspicion twisting in her gut. This kindness felt calculated, as if he were waiting for something. The town hadn't forgotten about her. They had cast her out, but they hadn't let her go. One morning, she saw them from the small window of the cabin, 2 deputies from the town, their horses picking their way carefully through the trees. Her blood ran cold. They weren't led by Sheriff Cutter. These were his men, sent to do his bidding. Boone met them at the edge of the clearing. He stood there, silent and immense, his arms crossed over his chest. He was like a boulder, an immovable part of the landscape. The deputies reined in their horses, their unease obvious. "We're just checking on the widow, Boone," one of them called out, trying to sound casual. "Sheriff's orders, wants to make sure she's decent." Boone didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared. "We need to have a look inside," the other deputy said, his hand straying toward the pistol on his hip. Mary Beth's heart pounded. She knew this wasn't about decency. It was about something else. They had come for something. Suddenly, Boone took one step forward. It was a small movement, but it was filled with so much power, so much unspoken threat, that both deputies flinched. Their horses shied back. "She's fine," Boone's voice rumbled, low and final. "Go back and tell your sheriff to leave her be." The deputies exchanged a nervous glance. They looked at the cabin, then back at the mountain of a man blocking their path. Whatever they were looking for, it wasn't worth tangling with Jedediah Boone. Muttering curses, they wheeled their horses around and retreated back the way they had come. Mary Beth leaned against the door frame, her legs weak with relief. But the relief was quickly replaced by a question. Why would the sheriff send men all the way out here? It made no sense. Unless he thought she had something he wanted. Something more than just her burden. That night, as she was tucking the girls into their makeshift bed, her fingers brushed against something hard inside Rose's old rag doll. It was the one thing they'd managed to keep, clutched in her daughter's hand since the day they left. Mary Beth had never thought anything of it. Her fingers fumbled with the worn stitching at the doll's seam. She pulled it loose. Inside, tucked deep into the stuffing, was a small folded piece of oilcloth. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. It wasn't a letter. It was a map. A crude drawing of the area around the town. And in the corner, in her husband Jacob's familiar scrawl, were a few hurried words. Cutter's debt. Under the hanging oak. Forgive me, Mary. Cutter's debt? What debt? Jacob had never mentioned any dealings with the sheriff. And the map? It pointed to a place deep in the woods, not far from where they were now. It was a key. A key to a secret she didn't understand. A secret that had gotten her thrown out of her home. A secret the sheriff was willing to send armed men to recover. She looked across the room at Boone, who was sharpening his axe by the firelight, his face a mask of shadows. He had saved them. He had protected them. But she suddenly had the terrifying feeling that he hadn't found them by accident. She walked over to him, the oilcloth map clutched in her hand. Her voice was barely a whisper. "What do you know about this?" she asked, holding it out. Boone stopped his work. He didn't look at the map. His pale eyes lifted and met hers. There was no surprise in them, only a deep, weary sadness. "I know," he said, his voice heavy, "that your husband was a good man. And I know Sheriff Cutter is the reason he's in the ground." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. The fever. They had all said it was a fever. But the look in Boone's eyes told a different story. A story of murder. "Jacob and I were partners," Boone said slowly, his voice a low rumble that seemed to shake the very logs of the cabin. "We found something up in these hills. Something the town was built on. Gold." Mary Beth stared at him, unable to process the words. "Gold?" "Not a lot," Boone continued. "But enough. Enough to change things. Jacob wanted to file a proper claim, share it with the town, help it grow. He was an honest man. Too honest." His eyes darkened. "Cutter found out. He didn't want a share. He wanted it all. He and a few of his cronies, the same ones who run the town council, the same ones whose wives whispered about you in the street. They wanted it all for themselves." The pieces started to click into place, forming a picture so ugly it made her sick. The whispers, the judgment, the haste to get rid of her. It wasn't about shame. It was about fear. "Jacob knew they were coming for him," Boone said. "The fever was quick, too quick. Before he got sick, he managed to get a message to me. Told me to watch over you. Told me you had the map to the rest of the claim. He trusted you to keep it safe, even if you didn't know what it was." So Boone had been waiting. He hadn't stumbled upon them by accident on that road. He had been watching, protecting them from the shadows. "Cutter got the first haul," Boone said, his hand clenching into a fist. "It's what paid for the new church bell, the sheriff's fancy office. The whole town is living on your husband's stolen legacy. And they're all in on it. They threw you out because they were terrified you'd find this map, that you'd uncover the truth. The truth. The truth was that her husband hadn't just died. He had been murdered. The town hadn't just judged her. It had conspired to silence her. Sheriff Cutter wasn't a lawman. He was a killer and a thief. And she was holding the proof in her hands. The full weight of it crushed down on her. The grief she had carried for months was suddenly ignited into a hot, white flame of rage. They had taken everything from her. Her husband, her home, her name. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice shaking with a fury she had never known she possessed. Boone picked up his axe, the firelight gleaming on its polished edge. His face was grim, set like granite. "Jacob was my friend," he said. "They took my friend, and they took what was ours. Now, they're coming for his family." He looked toward the door, as if he could already hear them approaching. "We don't wait for them. We make our stand, and we take back what they stole." The first sign of their approach was the flicker of torches through the dense trees. It was just after dusk, the world painted in shades of gray and black. They weren't being subtle anymore. Cutter was done with veiled threats and deputies on reconnaissance. He was coming to finish the job. Boone moved with a swift, silent economy. He barred the heavy door and shuttered the single window. He handed Mary Beth an old, heavy rifle. "Do you know how to use this?" She nodded, her hands surprisingly steady as she took the cold weight of the steel. Jacob had taught her. He'd insisted on it. "A woman alone needs to know how to protect her own," he'd said. Another memory that was now a poisoned dart. "Keep the girls in the root cellar," Boone instructed, his voice calm, but with a deadly edge. "Stay away from the door. He'll try to burn us out." Mary Beth herded the terrified twins down the short ladder into the small, dark space beneath the floorboards. "It's a game, my darlings," she whispered, her voice tight. "A game of hide and seek. You must be very, very quiet." She kissed their foreheads, her heart breaking at the fear in their eyes. When she climbed back up, the first shout came from the darkness. "Holloway! I know you're in there! And you, Boone! This has nothing to do with you. Send out the woman and the brats, and we'll let you walk away." It was Cutter's voice, full of false confidence. Boone let out a short, harsh laugh that sounded like rocks grinding together. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Mary Beth took her position near a small crack in the log wall, the rifle resting against it. She could see them now. Cutter and at least a dozen men, a mix of deputies and townsfolk she recognized. Men who had tipped their hats to her just months ago. Men who had sat in the pews at church and listened to Pastor Calloway preach about charity and grace. Hypocrites, all of them. The first shot splintered the wood of the door. The siege had begun. What followed was a terrifying symphony of chaos. Gunshots echoed through the night, the flash of muzzles lighting up the clearing in brief, hellish bursts. The men outside were yelling, trying to build up their courage, but they were clumsy. They were town men playing at being soldiers. Boone was something else entirely. He moved from one side of the cabin to the other, firing his own rifle through carefully chosen gaps in the walls. He never wasted a shot. Each one was precise, aimed not to kill, but to maim, to terrify. A shot that splintered the stock of a man's rifle. Another that hit the ground just inches from a man's foot, sending him scrambling back into the darkness. He was a force of nature, a spirit of the mountain defending his lair. Mary Beth felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a burning resolve. These men had murdered her husband. They had terrorized her children. They would not win. She lined up her sights on a man trying to sneak toward the cabin with a lit torch. She remembered Jacob's words. Breathe out slow. Squeeze. Don't pull. She fired. The torch flew from the man's hand as he cried out, clutching his shoulder. The flames sputtered and died in the snow. A cheer, low and guttural, came from Boone's side of the cabin. "Good shot, Mary Beth." Hearing her name, hearing the approval in his voice, stoked the fire inside her. She wasn't a widow. She wasn't a burden. She was a woman defending her home. The standoff dragged on. The men outside grew more frustrated. They were losing their nerve. They had expected a quick, easy fight, a lone woman and an old mountain man. They hadn't counted on a fortress defended by a ghost and a lioness. Then, Cutter changed tactics. "Burn it!" he roared. "Smoke them out!" Several torches were lit at once. The men charged, protected by a volley of covering fire. Splinters flew from the walls around Mary Beth. But she held her ground. She and Boone fired in a steady rhythm, 2 shots, then a move to a new position. 2 more shots. They were a well-oiled machine of defiance. 1 torch made it to the wall. The dry logs, coated in pitch, caught instantly. Flames began to lick up the side of the cabin. Panic tried to claw its way up Mary Beth's throat. The girls were below. "The well," Boone grunted, already moving. He unbarred the back door, a smaller exit she hadn't even noticed, hidden behind a stack of furs. "Keep them busy." He slipped out into the darkness like a shadow. Mary Beth fired the rifle twice more toward the front, praying it would be enough of a distraction. The room was already starting to fill with smoke. Her eyes burned. Seconds felt like hours. The crackle of the flames was growing louder, a hungry, devouring sound. Suddenly, a series of terrified screams erupted from outside, followed by the sound of bodies crashing through the underbrush. Through the cracks in the wall, Mary Beth saw a scene of pure chaos. Boone had circled around them. He wasn't using his rifle now. In his hands was his axe. He moved among them not like a man, but like an avenging spirit. He was a whirlwind of fury and vengeance, the firelight glinting off the swinging blade. He wasn't trying to kill them, she realized. He was breaking them. He shattered rifles, disabled limbs, and used the flat of the axe to send men flying. It was a brutal, terrifying, and masterful display of controlled violence. The remaining men, including Sheriff Cutter, broke and ran. They scrambled for their horses, tripping over each other in their haste to escape the demon of the mountain. Boone didn't pursue them. He turned and methodically doused the flames on the cabin wall with buckets of water from the well. The fire hissed and died, leaving a blackened scar on their home. He came back inside, his chest heaving. The axe in his hand was clean. Mary Beth rushed to the cellar hatch and threw it open. The girls scrambled up, coughing from the smoke but otherwise unharmed. They ran to her, burying their faces in her skirt. The clearing was silent now, save for the groans of the men Boone had left behind. "It's not over," Boone said, his voice heavy. "He'll be back. With more men." "Then we can't stay here," Mary Beth said, her mind racing. "The map. The claim is the only thing that will prove what he did." Boone nodded grimly. "The Hanging Oak. It's a day's walk from here. We leave at first light." They didn't win the battle. They had only survived it. The war for Jacob's justice was just beginning, and their only chance was to walk deeper into the wilderness, toward a dead man's secret, with a pack of killers on their trail. They left the wounded where they lay. It was a cold mercy, but mercy nonetheless. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the blackened trees, they set out, leaving the besieged cabin behind. The journey was tense, every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sending a jolt of fear through Mary Beth. Boone moved ahead, his eyes constantly scanning, his rifle at the ready. The Hanging Oak was an ancient, gnarled tree that stood alone on a rocky ridge, its branches twisted like arthritic fingers. It looked like a sentinel, guarding a long-forgotten secret. Following the map's instructions, Boone began to dig at the base of the massive trunk. The ground was hard and frozen, but he worked with a relentless strength. Mary Beth stood watch, holding the girls close, her own rifle sweeping the perimeter. The silence of the woods felt different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. After nearly an hour, Boone's shovel hit something solid, a metal lockbox. He hauled it out of the hole. It was rusted but intact. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were two things: a leather-bound journal and a heavy buckskin pouch. Mary Beth opened the pouch. Her breath hitched. It was full of gold nuggets, gleaming with a dull, heavy light. More money than she had ever seen in her life. But it was the journal that was the real treasure. It was Jacob's. His familiar handwriting filled the pages. It was all there. The discovery of the gold, his partnership with Boone, his plans for the town. And then the entries turned dark. He wrote of Cutter's greed, of the threats, of his growing fear. The final entry was chilling. Cutter came to see me today. He brought a bottle, said we should celebrate the town's good fortune. His eyes were wrong. I think this is the end. Boone, if you read this, protect her. Mary Beth, I am so sorry. The rest of the claim is yours. Don't let him take it. Tears streamed down Mary Beth's face as she read her husband's last words. It was proof. Undeniable proof of murder and theft. A sharp whistle from Boone shattered the moment. He was pointing down the ridge. Cutter and his men were coming. And this time, there were more of them. They were moving fast, fanning out to surround the ridge. They had tracked them. There's no running, Boone said, his voice grim. This is where it ends. He pulled Mary Beth and the girls behind a cluster of massive boulders that formed a natural fortress. Whatever happens, he said, looking her straight in the eye, protect that journal. It's the only thing that matters. The first shots rang out, kicking up dirt near their feet. Cutter wasn't trying to scare them anymore. He was here to erase them. Give it up, Holloway! Cutter screamed from the trees. Give me the box and I'll make it quick for you and the kids. Rage, pure and undiluted, surged through Mary Beth. He murdered your father! She yelled to her daughters, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she had. He stole from us! We are not giving him anything! She raised her rifle and fired toward Cutter's voice. The fight on the ridge was desperate. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Boone was a legend, but he was not immortal. A bullet grazed his arm, and he grunted in pain but kept firing. They were being pinned down, the circle of men tightening around them. Hope was dwindling. It felt like the end. The town, the lies, the greed. It was all going to be buried here on this cold ridge, along with them. Then they heard it. A new sound. Not gunfire. A bugle call, clear and sharp, echoing through the valley. Cutter and his men stopped firing, confusion spreading through their ranks. And then they appeared. A column of blue-coated soldiers on horseback, riding hard up the ridge, led by a stern-looking man with a U.S. Marshal's star pinned to his chest. One of Cutter's deputies, a young man who had always looked uneasy with the sheriff's cruelty, had ridden through the night. He hadn't gone back to town. He had ridden for the nearest federal outpost. His conscience had finally won. Cutter's face went white with terror. He and his men were caught, trapped between Boone's rifle and the full force of the law. They threw down their weapons, their blustering courage vanishing in an instant. It was over. The marshal listened grimly as Mary Beth, her voice hoarse but steady, told him the whole story. He read Jacob's journal, his expression hardening with every page. He looked at the gold, then at the craven, defeated face of Sheriff Cutter. Amos Cutter, the marshal's voice boomed across the ridge. I'm arresting you for robbery, conspiracy, and the murder of Jacob Holloway. As for the rest of you, he said, glaring at the townsfolk, you'll all be answering for your part in this. Justice had come, not from the town, but for it. The return to town was unlike the day she had left. Mary Beth rode on a horse provided by the marshal, her daughters seated in front of her. Boone walked beside them, his arm bandaged but his head held high. They rode past the iron gates that had been slammed shut on them and into the silent, staring crowd. Every face was there. Martha Greaves, her mouth agape. Pastor Calloway, his face a mask of shame. They saw her, not as a burden, but as the woman who had brought down the corrupt heart of their town. They saw the truth. The gold from the claim was rightfully hers. She was now the wealthiest person in the very town that had cast her out. But it wasn't about the money. It was about her name. It was about Jacob's name. She didn't stay. She couldn't. The town was built on a foundation of lies, and she wanted no part of it. She used the gold to buy a large tract of land, miles away, in a valley with a clear running river. She built a new home there. A real home, with room for her daughters to run, and a porch where Jedediah Boone, their guardian and friend, could sit and watch the sun go down over the mountains that had saved them. They had been exiled into the cold, left for dead by a world that judged them worthless. But in the heart of that wilderness, they found something more valuable than gold. They found the truth. They found their strength. And they found a new family, forged not by blood, but by fire, loyalty, and a justice they had to claim for themselves. If you were inspired by Mary Beth's incredible journey from exile to redemption, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button for more stories of survival and justice.